All right, guys, welcome aboard. It's time for the weekly Mac Forum video chat. Once again, we're running on Monday this week, as opposed to our usual Sunday night show, causing a little bit of confusion there for you guys. I know. I had a few things to take care of last night. Didn't quite get things out on the time frame that we normally do, but that's okay. I think you'll enjoy the show anyway. If you post a question or a comment to the show during the show tonight, I may not see it. Having a little issue with spaces set up here. Something's gone cuckoo. So I'll be kind of flipping back and forth between the two things to see what's going on. So I may miss a comment or two. If I do, I'll try to fix that when I make a note when I do the show notes later in the day. Uh, all right, first of all, let's get right into things. As usual, we have a forum roundup tonight, a bunch of other things going on. Might be a kind of short broadcast. I didn't get to do as much research this week for tips and tricks, but we have a few things that I think you'll enjoy. First of all, uh, welcome to our newest member, Boca Raton, looks like LTD. He's our newest member. He or she is our newest member. We have a total now of 288,862 as of about half an hour before showtime started. So I want to welcome our newest member and all of our new members that have joined in the last week. Hope you find some useful information here. Let's also keep in mind if you want to be involved in asking questions on the forum, you need to register and become a member. You can lurk and read our responses to other questions and search the forum without being a member, but to ask a question, you need to be a member. Also, please don't post your support questions in the uh, contact us area. The only people that see that are the forum moderators. And to get it seen by a wider array of people, you're going to need to become a member and post your questions. All right, let's get right into some things that we want to talk about today. Couple of things that come to mind for me over the past week in the forum. First of all, we spent some time talking in the forum this week about a few things. One of them is that, of course, there's still some discussion about the most recent iPhone notifications, a few other things. That thread has been going. We've got some ongoing threads about various support issues related to how to get back to get your Mac back functional if you're having a problem with the OS. Generally speaking, I'll tell you, we've been fielding a lot of questions recently over the last year or so, probably, uh, which deal with some variation of how do I get back to whatever. They installed a new operating system, don't like it, want to go back to whatever they had before, whatever it may be. As a general rule, I'm going to tell you one of the easiest way to do this. How you do it varies a little bit from depending on which version of the OS that you started with and whether you had a backup. But one of the easiest ways across the board is to do the following: before you um, update your operating system, make a clone of that your current setup, assuming that it is functioning well. Make a clone of that setup. Uh, the two programs that seem to be most often mentioned on the forum are Carbon Copy Cloner and Super Duper, but there are others that will do this cloning for you. Now, the difference between a clone and a time machine backup, there's nothing wrong with a time machine backup, but understand something. A time machine backup is not directly bootable. And that means that in the event of a disaster, or if you want to go backwards in terms of operations, you're going to have to reinstall the operating system first and then load your backup. Whereas with a clone, you can boot directly from that clone, and and then in the process reinstall the OS and your applications and data in one fell swoop. So that's a good thing to think of. So we have some other things in the forum. Of course, as I mentioned, our comments about the recent iPhone notices uh, continue. We've had people questioning or asking questions about which Macs to get. You'll find a wealth of that kind of information. That is highly dependent on what you do with the Mac and what kinds of things you anticipate doing. One of the things, too, that I want to mention, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail here in just a second, but another thread that popped up, my apologies for not remembering the member who started this thread. I saw the tail end of the thread just before the show and did not write down the username. But some of you who are longtime members will remember that we frequently recommend uh, the OS 10 maintenance application called Onyx here for doing things like cleaning caches and a host of other things. And someone posted asking the question if there is an equivalent application for the iPhone. Presumably, one of the functions there is the need to reclaim some space on a phone. We went through a phase where the smallest iPhone that you could get in terms of storage was 8 gigabyte, and that has now been jumped up to 16 gigabyte on a lot of the 6 models, on the 6 and 6S models. I think the day is coming, and probably soon, when we will see 32 or even 64 gigabyte as the minimum, driven by two things. First of all, the price of flash memory, the flash storage rather, that's used continues to drop. And second of all, we all seem to be loading our iPhones up with more and more in the way of data and applications, movies, songs, other kind of media. So if you have, say, an 8 gig or a 16 gig phone, you may find yourself in a position where you are running short on memory available space, on storage space. Now, there are a couple of things that you can do, and I'll link to some articles that mention some fixes. One was at Lifehacker, and one I believe was one of the PC magazines. I'll have to look at my notes. But couple things that you want to do to free up some space. One of them is go through your phone, plug your phone into iTunes, and go ahead and open everything up. I'm gonna mention these menus in terms of the current version of iTunes. It's 12 point something, but there are other versions, and the settings are somewhat similar. You're gonna want to go into your devices and look at your device, whether it's your iPad or your iPhone. Go ahead and have a look at that. And when you click on your device, you'll see some information about it. First of all, the overall capacity, where you want the backup saved to, whether you want it synced over the air or only by wire. But there's a couple of things that you can do to buy yourself some extra space. Let's start with some of the obvious ones. A couple of settings in this area. first of all, one of your settings there is to say prefer standard definition videos. That means that if you've got a high definition movie or other video clip, it's going to, iTunes is going to create a standard definition version for syncing with your phone. Now, some of you may not like that. You prefer the high def. I know when I'm at home, I prefer looking at the high def channels on the TV as opposed to the standard definition. But when you're traveling, particularly if you're looking at things on the smaller iPhone screens, sometimes the standard definition setup is going to be fine for what you're doing. So look at that. That's one way to save yourself a significant amount of space. Another setting that can save you some space is one that says convert higher bitrate songs to a lower bitrate, and it's primarily AAC. But for example, if you go from a 320 something K uh, per second um, MP3 down to a 128K AAC file, that's going to save you some space if you have a lot of music that you're using. You can also manually control um, what's on your phone in terms of, I don't want my entire collection on my phone. For me, that's a necessity uh, because my entire collection would not fit on my 16 gig phone. Also, when you're the other reason that you might want to take control of these settings manually is that, let's face it, most of us, I think, during the day, I know it's certainly true for me, I don't have a lot of media on my phone because, to be honest with you, with my work situation being in the classroom during the day, I don't have an opportunity to just be streaming a movie, listening to a movie, listening to music from my phone. So I don't really keep a whole lot of that kind of stuff on my phone. I tend to load some of that, more of that rather, when I'm traveling. Now, while we're talking about what's on your phone, another way to save yourself some space is to go through the apps that are on your phone and ask yourself this question: do I really need this app on my phone? Is this something that I've used recently, or is this something that I downloaded months and months ago to try and I just never removed it? I think we probably all have, if we've had our phones for any length of time. I know I certainly do. We all have had some collection of stuff on our phones that we could probably do without. That will buy you some space. Once you've done that and you've gone through each little area, gone through movies, gone through music, apps, and removed things that you don't need or you don't use regularly, um, that should buy you some space. Another thing that you can do, and I mentioned this last week, excuse me, is to go in and look at your settings, look at available space. I'll repost the exact steps. But what you're going to do is you're going to go into available space. You're going to look at how much is there, and then you're going to jot that number down, keep it in the back of your head so that you know. And let's say that you've got 3 gigabyte of available space, just for the sake of argument. Then I'm going to go into the iTunes store. I'm going to find a movie that's more space, that needs more space than I have. So if I have 3 gig, I'm going to find a movie with that needs 5 or 6 gig worth of space. I'm going to scroll down to where I can rent it or buy it. I'm going to double tap. It's going to try to start the download, and then it's going to tell me that it can't, that it doesn't have enough space. That's okay. That's exactly what you want to happen. Then I'm going to go back and look at my available space. And the number of what space is available, the amount of space that you have available should have gone up. So it might go from, say, 2 gigabyte to 2.2 gigabyte or 2.3 gigabyte or whatever. When it goes up, go back to the iTunes store, pick that movie, double tap just like you're going to rent it or buy it, and repeat the process. Check your available space again. Keep doing that until that number, that available space number, stops going up. When it stops, that means that you've reclaimed about all the space that you're going to. Now, that appeared in a Cult of Mac article. As I say, I ran this tip last week. Um, and for me, it only bought back, about 400 megabyte, 3 or 400 megabyte worth of space. That could be a function of the fact that I don't keep a lot of stuff on my phone. If you tend to keep a lot of video on your phone, or keep a lot of audio, or you're moving a lot of content around on your phone, that may reclaim a significant amount of space for you. Some users, if you're looking at the Cult of Mac site, some users are reporting that they have reclaimed several gigabyte of information, or space rather. And I want to say again, kind of like I said last week, when you do this tip, make sure, I strongly suggest that you choose a movie or something, or video or something of that nature that you're going to like. That is, if you go through and you run this and you accidentally buy it, you're not going to be upset. I chose the new Star Wars because I plan on buying that at some point, and I ran that procedure several times to reclaim. It took me about 3 times for the number to stabilize, for the available space numbers to stabilize. Tried it on my iPad, got similar results. But once again, I don't put a lot of media and other things on the iPad. So between getting rid of applications and other content that you don't use a lot, being selective about what you put on your phone to begin with, and then also using that reclamation procedure, you should be able to reclaim some space on your phone and make way for other things. Let me go back to my notes here, which are in another space. I want to also point out, when we talk about space and some helpful tips and everything, our buddy Kirk McLaren, who we frequently refer to as Kirk the iTunes guy, has a couple of articles for Macworld this week, or not all this week, but a couple that look familiar, or that are useful to you. Um, One of them is um, an article. You may hear the Macworld video playing in the background. Yo, Macworld people, could you stop trying to annoy me with these videos that auto load? If I want to auto load a video when your site loads, I think I can click on it. Thank you. Anyhow, um, one of the articles that I ran into from Kirk this week, usually his articles have something to do with iTunes or music. These two have something to do with transferring files. This first one is transferring things between your iOS device and your Mac. And then in just a moment, I'll give you a quick rundown on some things that he has in mind for transferring files from Mac to Mac. First of all, look at AirDrop as a means of transferring files from your iOS device to the Mac or vice versa. Uh, AirDrop is a piece of Apple technology that allows us to share files across devices. You can transfer files from Mac to Mac, or files from a Mac to an iOS device, or from one iOS device to another. Okay, on your Mac, you're going to choose Go and then select AirDrop in the Finder. And then on your iDevice, your iOS device, make sure that AirDrop is activated. Swipe up from the control center at the bottom of the screen to access it. And you can choose to transfer from contacts only or from everyone. Contacts only obviously is going to allow you to accept transfers from only people in your contacts, what we used to call the address book in the Mac world. Uh, if obviously if you set it to everyone, it's going to set and allow transfers from everyone. Your iOS device needs to be awake for AirDrop to be active. And you can drag, if you're on the Mac side, you can drag a file onto the icon for your iOS device in the AirDrop window. And on your device, you'll see a menu offering your Mac. On your iOS device, you'll see a menu offering your Mac as one of the possibilities. Um, AirDrop doesn't seem to be very helpful with AAC files, for example, um, because it sometimes shares it with applications that you don't really want it to, such as Evernote. But it does work with some of the things. Uh, so you'll have to experiment, see which ones you like. Uh, Sending files via email is another option. Dropbox, iCloud Drive, any of these cloud services, you can send stuff back and forth. The exact steps on how you do it will depend on that particular system. Dropbox is a little different from iCloud Drive, which is a little different from OneDrive. All of them have slightly different setups. You can use iTunes file sharing. Some iOS applications use iTunes file sharing as a way of adding and managing files in iTunes, within iTunes, so that the iOS devices can access them. That's one option. It's an option I frequently forget about. And then he also mentions a program called Walter. Normally, when you transfer media files, you're going to need to make sure that these um, files are in iTunes friendly formats. Okay. And then you sync within iTunes. But if you use iTunes file sharing to transfer files, you can use applications such as VLC and others, and then run them through Walter, and that will put the files in a format that can be used. It's very easy. As I say, I've experimented with Walter a little bit. A number of things I like about it. I haven't had everything that I haven't tested all of the features, but so far I like what I've seen. And then on the other end of things, our good buddy Kurt has an article which goes back to a couple of days ago, actually. I thought this was a little older than that, but I'm looking at the date and it goes back to about April 6th. And it is how to share files from Mac to Mac. One area to do this is file sharing. It's the most basic. I use this. I used to use this a lot more than I do now. It involves going into the sharing pane in system preferences, turning on file sharing. If you want, you can also turn on printer sharing and some other things. But when you share files, you can choose to share the entire drive or specific folders. My thing is to share as few places as you can get by with, because that way, if someone were to gain access to your system, they can only see the files in certain folders. Okay, you can do that. He has a really brief tutorial, but there's tons of other good tutorials on the web for setting that up. I ran a Mac-based file server in my home just to share files over our internal network for up until a couple of years ago, when I no longer had a need for it. I had a spare Mac laying around. It was an older Mac. It was a little too slow to uh, really push with stressful situations, but it did okay as a file server. I was able to use file sharing as a means of doing it. You can actually turn on SMB file sharing, which allows you to share files with a Windows driven machine. And we were able to do all of that relatively easily. The Windows side kind of complained a little bit from time to time. It took me a minute to figure out what was wrong there. But you could do all of that relatively easily. And we did not have to have the server edition of OS 10. We did it using only the editions that were available commercially as the standard operating system. Some people who do heavy duty file sharing are going to need a little more than that. But for just general use, that works. AirDrop is a good way to pass files. Email, Dropbox, again, Dropbox, iDrive, these cloud based services, just like we were talking about with sharing with iDevices, they come in handy when you're sharing files Mac to Mac. Uh, Torrent clients, such as BitTorrent Sync, uh, can be a help, as well as FTP. I have used FTP as a means of transferring files from one Mac to another. I have to tell you, I can do it. I understand it, but I haven't used an FTP program consistently since the Gopher days. Okay. That tells you, those of you who have been around a while, you know about Gopher. All right. You know how long it's been since that was a widely used program. Uh, FTP transfer has always given me a colossal headache. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I understand it. I just don't like it. And of course, the last thing he mentioned is SneakerNet. Now, way back in the olden days, SneakerNet involved using a floppy disk, insert the floppy disk into one computer, copy the file over, take the disk out, walk it over to the other machine, insert disk, lather, rinse, repeat, and hopefully you got your files from A to B. Well, now people are still doing SneakerNet from time to time for a variety of reasons. But now, instead of inserting, say, an 800K floppy or 1.44 megabyte high density floppy, they're substituting multi gigabyte USB stick drives, these flash memory drives. So um, that's a handy thing to have around. Keep SneakerNet in mind from time to time. It's particularly helpful if you're trying to pass a file to a machine that you don't have to access very often. That way. Or if you don't know, you're going into a building and you don't know exactly which machine you're going to have access to. SneakerNet is one way to go, and with the advent of these USB stick drives, you can pass even some very large files. All right, and that really is going to do it for this week. That covers pretty much the tips that we had on hand. I do want to mention, I'll call this a mini rant, even though it isn't. Our buddy Kurt McLaren has started a series that he refers to as "Hey Apple, fix this." I love that title. That is so funny. And what he's going to do with that title is, or with that article, is periodically he's going to talk about things in Apple hardware and Apple software that he thinks they should fix. Now, when I say Apple hardware and Apple software, you might, for example, find a comment about Pages in there because it's made by Apple, but you probably wouldn't find a comment about something in Microsoft Office that needs to be fixed. He's focusing on the Apple applications and the Apple hardware. And his first pick, and I have to admit, I agree with him. And if you have been listening to the show the last couple of weeks, you know this because I mentioned it 2 or 3 weeks ago. His pet peeve at the moment is the Apple Notes application, specifically the fact that you can't change the uh, font style and size easily. The To be honest with you, if you're a little older, you got notes on your Mac, the font that it opens up as the default when you start a note is too small, and you're stuck with selecting your text and hitting Command plus to enlarge the text until you get a size that you like. I would love to see. I don't know why they didn't put in a feature that let you set the preference. Uh, Simply, it seems to me it would be relatively easy to do that. In fact, I think one of the previous versions of notes on the iOS devices had a little more capability to set that. So he's going to be, that's his rant. I suppose it's not quite fair to call it a rant because he really doesn't blow his cool about this, and his thoughts are very carefully thought out. But it's going to be interesting to see what that segment becomes. I hope uh, he sticks with it because he's got some very interesting ideas. Usually, I find myself agreeing with him a lot on what needs to be done to improve things. The one area that he and I don't always see eye to eye on is the need for turning something like the Apple TV into a server so you don't need to run your Mac all the time just to share your iTunes content. But that's a minor difference of opinion between us. He has some very specific issues that he think would become a problem. I agree with him. If it's not done carefully, it could become a problem, but it's well worth a look. But he right now he's focusing on notes in this column. I'll keep you up to date on what the next one is about. I suspect that at some point you will hear some discussion from him about how closed, for lack of a better word, that the system has become in terms of the things that users can work on. There are fewer and fewer systems that you can add memory to on your own, fewer and fewer systems that you can add hard drives to on your own. But I suspect that will come up in the future. But I don't know for sure. I haven't spoken with him about that. So I encourage you to keep reading. And that's going to do it for this week, guys. We'll have more next week, hopefully with a few more tips and tricks. Tune in during the week. You'll catch me on the forum. You'll see me, you know me as Sly Dude on the forum. If you have some comments about the show, let us know. If you got some suggestions, let us know about those as well. And I have some things coming up over the summer that I hope to do to improve the show. But until then, we will see you next week on the Sunday Mac Forum video chat.